Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. Hello and welcome to the 200th episode of the British Theatre Guide podcast and our first of 2020. Usually we would be bringing you an interview with someone from the world of theatre, but we thought we would do something different to mark this milestone. We didn't think it was worth putting together clips of past episodes, as they are all still available to listen to in their full glory. And if I'm honest, I didn't have time to listen through and edit together parts of 199 episodes. Instead of that, I have interviewed some of our reviewers who have been with us for a long time, partly so you can find out a bit about them, their interests and their experiences in theatre and reviewing, but also to build up a picture of theatre around the UK today and how it has changed in the 18 years that British Theatre Guide has existed. But first, I'll let them all introduce themselves.
My name is Peter Lathan. I am the North East editor of the British Theatre Guide, although I did actually found it originally, way back in the dim and distant past.
Philip Fisher, I'm the London editor of British Theatre Guide.
Sandra, Giorgetti, and I'm a London reviewer and news editor.
I'm Steve Orme, the Midlands editor of the British Theatre Guide.
I'm Mark Smith, and I review mostly in York, but a bit throughout Yorkshire.
My name is David Chadderton. I'm the editor of the British Theatre Guide and the North West editor.
I'm Simon Sladen, and I'm the Panto editor and one of the London team of reviewers at the British Theatre Guide.
Velda Harris. I live in South Yorkshire, and I'm reviewing for Sheffield theatres, which includes the Crucible Studio, and the Victorian Lyceum Theatre.
First of all, I asked them to explain how they started to review for BTG. Here's Philip.
I started before British Theatre Guide. The starting point was I became a theatre critic the best part of 20 years ago for an esteemed theatrical publication called Accounting Web, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a website for accountants. And yeah, I was having a nice time. Most theatres were a bit wary, to say the least. I think that may have been a mistake on their part. And then the following August, I was in Edinburgh, and we have David Gregg to thank for this, because I was standing in a queue to see, I think it was Caligula by David Gregg, and it got held up drastically by about half an hour. And the bloke next to me in the queue and I started chatting, and he said he ran a website which was the About.com's theatre website. And this was a guy called Peter Lathan. And so I said, do you need a London critic? And he said, we don't pay. And I said, that wasn't the question that I asked. And I rather successfully became About.com's London theatre critic in September. And About.com removed the funding, I think it was about November of the same year. So at that point, I'd had a wonderful relationship with Peter for 2 months, was very happy writing with him. And rather than find anyone else, I stuck with him for maybe a month or two when he set up British Theatre Guide. And that's how I got into British Theatre Guide from before the inception.
I have always loved theatre, and I had been involved with co-editing the Sometimes Society magazine, but it was quite difficult to get anything that I wanted to write into that. So I was a subscriber to British Theatre Guide, and then one day I had a light bulb moment and thought, I wonder whether they would consider me writing for them. I got the opportunity to do some trial reviews, and the rest, as they say, is history.
I was watching a production at Derby, the old Derby Playhouse, and I thought, this is a cracking production, and it's a bit of a shame, really, that so few people will be able to read about it. So I was just doing a bit of research on the internet and came across the British Theatre Guide. That was in 2002. So I contacted the then editor, Peter Lathan, who said, yeah, let's have some reviews from the Midlands. And things have just snowballed from there.
Well, I stood in for the previous Yorkshire reviewer once or twice, and it was sort of early 2009, because I knew her just from sort of being around York. I was fresh in York, new in York. It was a woman called Cecily Boys, and when she left York, I applied to Peter for the sort of the permanent post, as it were. And I've been doing it ever since. So I was checking, and it was I've just missed my 10-year anniversary with British Theatre Guide. Didn't celebrate it, but yeah, that was sort of autumnish 2009 that I started. So I had a year over in Manchester, which was just fantastic. Really fascinating to kind of see a different kind of theatre scene, and to meet you, David, in person. And I was there. Yes, I was there for a year. Did as much reviewing and seeing theatre I could around Manchester and Salford, and then got a job back in York, and thankfully kind of picked up where I'd left off, and happily back in York now.
Well, I used to get the newsletter for Peter's about.com British Theatre when he used to do that, and then that disappeared, and then after a while I spotted that he'd started British Theatre Guide, and I started subscribing to that newsletter. And then at one point he put in the newsletter that he wanted reviewers in the Northwest and other places, so I emailed back and he let me start reviewing for British Theatre Guide in the Northwest. And then in 2012, he decided to retire as editor, and I took over from there.
I was stuffing envelopes for a friend who was well into the Lib Dems, and I sat next to an elderly doctor who had been doing the reviewing. But he had a terminal illness, and after a while he passed it on to me, for which I'm very grateful.
How did I start reviewing for the British Theatre Guide? I went to Royal Holloway, University of London, and we had a wonderful member of staff called Karen Fricker, who is an academic but also a critic. And she used to review for Variety and The Guardian and many other publications, and knew Philip very, very well. And we had a number, each week we would see a show and we would review it. And obviously she introduced us to the British Theatre Guide there. And one week it was the end of the term and it was our last week of reviewing and we had free choice. And she said, well, because it's Christmas, there's not much on. I mean, there's Panto, but it's nothing really much you can say about that. To which I was like, well, I've grown up with this. Weirdly, I can't find much literature about it. It doesn't seem to be an area that's been researched much. And also a lot of the reviews in local papers are all, hurrah, we've got a lovely show again, isn't it marvellous? And the major papers didn't really review Panto much. In the Stage, they get 150, 200 words. So I reviewed it and then reviewed Hackney Empire's Mother Goose and then did my essay on that. And we had a chat afterwards and she said, oh, you really enjoy reviewing, don't you? And I said, yes, do you know of any opportunities? So she introduced me to Philip, who then afterwards, it was probably about a year later, that I met Philip, and we met at the Lyric Hammersmith for the first time they reintroduced Panto at the venue, which was Jack and the Beanstalk with 4 writers. And I'd sent him some of my work because he asked to see some of that. And then we met and we saw the show. And then that really kick-started my reviewing. So I kicked off in 2009 reviewing Pantos. And then very kindly, he kept me on the London team. And back in those days, that's a decade ago now, been reviewing for a decade, I was seeing 2 or 3 things a night, which was great, from pub theatres to the well-known fringe venues to the larger West End shows, really expanding my theatrical palette. And then very kindly, David gave me the opportunity to come on as Panto editor and really push the site's Panto coverage. And it seems now we have a really faithful following of people who very much look forward to seeing what myself and our other reviewers say at this period of time and giving a critical response, not just it's Christmas hurrah. We saw some celebrities and Grandma had a lovely time. And I think that's really something that I have been very, very grateful for, as well as being able to see so much theatre across the country.
Finally, for Peter, I changed the question to how he started British Theatre Guide.
Well, it was interesting. I was a school teacher, head of performing arts. I was very keen on school productions, and I set up a website about school shows. It was called the School Show page. And an American company called General Internet sort of picked up on this and contacted me and said, we're starting a site on British theatre and we wondered if you'd care to run it. You'll get paid. So, I mean, what do you say? Yes, please, I had to train. They put me through a training, a distance learning thing. And the company was called The Mining Company. It was a division of General Internet. It was called The Mining Company because we mined the web for the best information, etc., on our specialist subjects. And I started working for them in February 97. And so that's when I first started reviewing at the same time. Then in 2001, it was taken over by a company called Prime Media, which is an American print company. And by this time, we had 900 sites on so many topics, it was just impossible to count them. And Prime Media got rid of all of the sites for which they didn't have a print equivalent. So naturally, I was out. In the night of the long knives in late September 2001, I got the push along with 300 others. I thought, right, I'll get a life now. I've missed the money, but I'll get a life. But I then started getting emails from people. I even had one from the National Theatre saying, please keep going, set it up yourself, And so many emails, so much pressure. In the end, I said, okay, and I did. And that was November 2001. And that's how it all got started.
Next, I asked them what their own background was in theatre or in reviewing. Here's Mark to kick us off.
Well, when I started reviewing for British Theatre Guide, I was just off a Masters in Theatre at the University of York, which was what took me to York in the first place. And since then, I've continued. I've completed my PhD in theatre also at York, and I'm now a lecturer in theatre at York University. And I do bits and pieces of directing and dramaturgy work as well. But my sort of 9 to 5, or a bit more than that, is as a lecturer at university.
Oh, well, it goes back a long way. I think I directed my first play when I was 10, in a fit of enthusiasm. I did a degree in English and drama at Manchester, and after a short period in teaching, I got into HE, mainly as a lecturer in drama. So I was at Sheffield, Sheffield Poly, which turned into Hallam for years and years, with responsibility for the drama department, and with quite a lot of contact with directors and so on from the Crucible. So there was something quite strong established there before I got involved with the reviewing. Then there was a period when I had 3 years in Hong Kong, followed by 5 years in London, when I worked for a drama college there. And then that was about it. And after a while I got involved in reviewing for BTG.
Well, I've been doing theatre since I was a teenager. I was in the youth group, the local amateur theatre, and I did lots and lots of amateur theatre when I was in my teens and early 20s. And then I started teaching theatre in a local theatre workshop in the early 90s. I still do that sometimes. I've been doing that ever since. I've also done written and directed theatre and education, which we've toured around schools in Greater Manchester until the funding dried up for that. And I've written a lot of youth group shows of various kinds, pantos, plays, musicals, dance shows, all sorts of things like that.
I've been a working journalist for nearly 50 years now, and I started, as many people do, on the local newspaper before graduating to radio and then television. And in the very early days, you had to do everything as a cub reporter, and I used to report on the local amateur drama groups, and I just took an interest in theatre, and it went from there. And hopefully I picked up enough hints and tips as I went along to be able to use them in any reviews that I did.
Well, I've never done any sort of ongoing theatre reviewing until I started writing for British Theatre Guide. My interest in theatre started, I think, when I was at school. I was lucky enough to go to a school where they organised lots of theatre trips. And I had one of those inspirational English literature teachers for O-level who completely opened my eyes to Shakespeare, which I just thought I was far too stupid to understand. And she made it all make sense for me. Then after school, I got involved with the Man in the Moon Theatre in Chelsea in my 20s. And through the people I met there and the opportunities that I had, that broadened out my interest into fringe theatre much more. And yes, and then I had to stop doing that really because I had to concentrate on a job that paid the rent.
In theatre, I first appeared on stage as a girl when I was 13. I was at an all-boys school, And so us young'uns played the women. And the first play I appeared in, and this is a school play, remember, was Sean O'Casey's Cock-a-Doodle Dandy. And I played Marion, the serving maid. And I was hooked. From then on, I appeared in every school show. I was invited to appear in a small part, admittedly, at the People's Theatre in Newcastle, which was the leading amateur company, or still is the leading amateur company in the Northeast, in Julius Caesar. And then I started directing, and I started writing, and of course I directed school plays myself. My first school play I directed was in 1967, when I directed Orme's Antigone. I've just been involved ever since, as a writer, as a director, as an actor, but I didn't actually start reviewing until 1997.
So I kicked off my reviewing actually before that course at Royal Holloway. The Independent used to have a reader's reviews. And my sister and I went to the first week of Avenue Q, and I sent it off. And to my surprise, it got published. And that really kicked off maybe I can write this. And I have a sort of critical view of that. I'd always grown up, done amateur dramatics, and we'd always in Littlehampton had a musical, a review and a panto. And so I studied German and drama at university. That's where my sort of critical acumen, if you like, came in. And then I also, throughout that time, taught drama. So I taught for a number of stage coaches. And then after my master's, I got position as a visiting lecturer at Royal Holloway. And I also taught at Winchester and Reading, and for Syracuse, their London campus. And then, sadly, no more work at many of those universities due to the financial crisis. But a position came available for a research project between Royal Holloway, Theatre Royal Haymarket and the Victoria and Albert Museum, to which I was successful in. And that really started my career to get me where I am today at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where I'm currently the Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Performance.
Theatre, I've always been to the theatre. I always loved theatre, and I was going increasing amounts. I go to the theatre an awful lot. In terms of criticism, I'd done absolutely nothing until the year before for Edinburgh. I persuaded Accounting Web that it would be a nice idea to have a column from Edinburgh, which they accepted. In Edinburgh, the PRs were reasonably receptive, and I think I saw about 40 shows in 10 days and figured I could do it. But at that point, I'd never been on a stage. I've never acted to this day, never been a critic, did an English A-level an extremely long time ago. So no background at all, really.
Moving on from our reviewers themselves, I asked each of them to give an overview of the current state of theatre in their area. For most of them, this referred to their geographical area, but for Simon, this meant his specialist area of Panto.
So what's the current state of Panto? Wow. I mean, looking back on the last 10 years, there's been a huge change, specifically in the makeup of the industry. You know, when First Family Entertainment came on the boards and gave Kudos Entertainment a big rivalry, if you like, that shook things up. Suddenly new sets were commissioned, new scripts were commissioned. There was a competition for the top venues, and competition is good in the industry, which can sometimes be a bit stale. I think we've seen, certainly with McKellen doing Panto at the Old Vic, that was another game changer, and certainly people looking at the form in a different view. We've seen big changes in cast structures. I mean, if you look at today, what are you likely to see? Well, a lot of those barons or emperors might not even be on the stage anymore. That's being written out. We're seeing more male immortals. We're seeing more drag artists employed as the villains. We're definitely seeing principal boys played by men, about 90% of that. The last few years, animal comics, be that the cow in Jack and the Beanstalk. So we are seeing a big change in makeup there. But I think the industry is rightly also coming under the lens a bit. You know, it is an inheritor of many of its Victorian practices. And so that misogyny, that racism, that sexism that's there is being assessed. And we're seeing what I would term progressive Panto, trying to right those wrongs that have been inherited of that time. But as we know from all of the stats, it is a buoyant industry. It is growing year on year. Capacity at venues, I mean, some venues sell over 100% because they have returns or they decide to add in extra seats. streets and things. So I think we're in a very, very good place. I think as long as the industry keeps looking at those issues, better representation of women, better representation of people from all different backgrounds, be that performers with disabilities, performers of colour, pantomime needs to be topical, it needs to be relevant, but it also needs to be representative.
Well, as far as I can see, quite healthy. There are the 3 theatres, and I mean, certainly when I review, they're packed. I mean, especially, well, no, most of them are packed, but certainly for the Crucible main shows, the attendance is very good. So it's quite interesting, the different things that happen in the 3 different theatres. The Crucible has an annual pattern, which includes things like the pantomime, the Christmas show, a couple of Shakespeare's, a local interest show for Sheffield People's Theatre, which is the general public. That's in the summer. Then there's the snooker, which brings in the money. So that's all that kind of thing. The pattern is pretty well the same. And the major productions are done by Robert Hastie, who's the recently appointed new artistic director. On the other hand, the Lyceum is a receiving theatre, and what it takes in usually is popular musicals, lots of them, popular and entertaining plays, usually coming on from the West End. But it also does ballet, Northern Ballet, for example, and Matthew Bourne's work, which is terrific. And it does visiting Shakespeare, and it does visiting opera. So there's quite a varied diet there, although it does kind of lean a bit heavily towards contemporary musicals. It also does repeats of work that was already been done, like Jamie, which originated in Sheffield, and a stage version of The Full Monty, which I've seen twice now. Then there's the studio, which again has quite a variety of stuff, but generally the short plays on social or political topics, gender issues, that kind of thing, from quite a lot of new work and otherwise stuff from small companies that are finding a venue there. So the broader context, there's lots of amateur dramatic societies in Sheffield and musical companies. So that's where I think the musicals form such an important part of the Crucible's output, and also why they're so well attended.
The state of theatre in the Midlands, particularly the East Midlands, is where I'm based. It's in a terrific state. The old Derby Playhouse, where I was watching the production when I decided I wanted to do some reviewing, that's now called Derby Theatre. It's in very good health. It's run by the University of Derby. It appears the Arts Council is very happy with the way things are going there, and the theatre is back among its the Arts Council's national portfolio holders. So that's doing very well, getting loads of money to help it out. And then over in Nottingham, we've got a couple of big venues. We've got the Theatre Royal and the Royal Concert Hall, which put on all sorts of touring entertainments. And then we've got Nottingham Playhouse. And about 18 months ago, Adam Penford took over as the artistic director there, and he's done a fantastic job. First of all, he brought in Mark Gatiss to take the lead role in The Madness of George III. And then a few months ago, he enticed Alex Kingston to come up to Nottingham to take the lead in An Enemy of the People. So particularly in good health in the East Midlands. And of course, we've got Curve in Leicester, which is putting on a load of musicals, and often that's the starting point for a new musical tour. And then over in the West Midlands, we've got all sorts of theatres who are doing really well there, particularly Birmingham Rep. They've just got a new management team in there, and they're doing really well and attracting not just big audiences for their main stage productions, but for their other work, because they've got 3 spaces over there, and they're doing all sorts of really good stuff there too.
It was a bit, I wouldn't say depressed last year, but it wasn't a vintage year. There's such a shortage of money, and you've got the main theatre, the main producing theatres going for co-productions rather than producing their own, so it reduces the amount of work for actors, it reduces the number of productions that we get to see, and so on. The commercial sector, places like the Theatre Royal in Newcastle and the Sunderland Empire, are doing really, really well. I mean, Sunderland Empire manages to pack them in for the West End musicals and for ballet and for opera, but we don't see much in the way of, well, The only plays we get there are things like Warhorse always does well. But try to put something else on, and it, in the old variety parlance, it dies on its arse.
The current state of theatre in Manchester is pretty healthy, really. Over the past year, it's been a bit strange because a few theatres have been closed for refurbishment, or they've lost their artistic director and not replaced them, or they've got a temporary artistic director. So some of the regular theatres over the past 12 months haven't been producing as much as they used to. Home hasn't got an artistic director and doesn't seem to be replacing them, and they seem to be mostly a receiving house now, although they do put a lot of resources into developing smaller artists and theatre companies. We do have some big touring shows still, coming to the big places like the Lower in the Palace and the Opera House. But we do have a very healthy fringe as well. We do have a fringe festival every year, and we have the Manchester International Festival, of course, which is much bigger. The Fringe Festival brings in lots of productions from outside, as well as the productions that are produced locally. And all year round, we've got like the King's Arms in Salford, we've got 53-2, which has just lost its building and then announced that it's got a new building. There is so much theatre around the northwest, certainly, but Manchester, where I'm mostly based, it seems to be in a very healthy state, and it seems to be getting the audiences as well.
It seems to be remarkably healthy. I've just done my review of the year, as you know, to your cost and pain. And musicals were really dying off. There didn't seem to be that many big musicals opening. And then in 2019, suddenly that's really picked up. The West End stage is doing pretty healthily. I'm not sure there are many dark theatres, though. It's become apparent the last few months, a lot of fill-in shows, sort of touring shows that suddenly jump in to replace disasters. But maybe that's always the way. Shakespeare seems to be struggling a bit at the moment. I think that's partly down to political correctness, because there seems to be, in order to put on Shakespeare, you need to change genders, make it gender neutral, etc. And that doesn't always work for the kind of plays that are most popular. But generally it seems to be healthy. I think I'd identified at least 4 new, fairly substantial new theatres that have opened in London in the last year. So it suggests all is going really well. We've just got a new government. Goodness knows what they will do. I'm not sure they'll be into funding the arts very much, but who knows?
It's exciting, I'd say. There've been lots of institutional changes recently for the first time in quite a long time, I suppose. The York Theatre Royal has seen quite an overhaul in its management. Damien Cruden was the artistic director for 20 odd years, I think, certainly long before I got to York, and had done lots of great things at the York Theatre Royal and had brought a lot into the theatre, a lot of the community into the theatre particularly. But he's stepped down now, and they're sort of currently in a bit of an interim period with Tom Bird as the executive producer taking a lot of the artistic decision-making as well. So that sort of invigorated the theatre somewhat, and we're getting a lot more fringe shows coming to the studio, is one thing I've noticed. Across Yorkshire, you know, there's the Leeds Playhouse has had James Brining at the helm now for a few years. I've really sort of admired a lot of his work there. Again, there's a lot of a move to facilitating the community on the biggest stages of the region, really. And I think that's true in Sheffield as well. You know, you see it across the Yorkshire region. So that's sort of, and that's very interesting to me. You know, that's one of the things that I research as well. So it's kind of topmost on my mind at the moment. But yeah, it does feel like there've been a lot of moves. I don't want to say over the last 5 years, 10 years, because I know that a lot of these things have been in place and have been kind of built towards over a longer time. But a lot of work towards community engagement and opening up the theatre to the community.
Well, I think it's very buoyant. I think for theatre lovers in South East London, the choice is pretty wide and interesting. And I'm very lucky to have the Brockley Jack, now called the Jack Studio Theatre, just down the road from me. I try and support that a lot, partly because I like it, but partly because I think it's really important that people do seek out and support their local fringe theatre, not just go to the bigger mainstream and commercial venues. I mean, there's a place for them, obviously, as well. But the fringe theatre is the wellspring from which so much comes. And when we first moved to South East London, there didn't seem to be that much fringe activity compared to other areas of London. So I was especially lucky we had that. We had the Albany and Deptford. But since then, actually lots of little venues have popped up. The Blue Elephant in Camberwell, Canada Water Theatre, that is programmed, in fact, by the Albany, the Bussey Building in Peckham, and so on. So I would say they're all pretty cash-strapped, but I think the landscape is looking very healthy.
As a direct follow-up to the last question, I asked them how theatre had changed in their area since they started reviewing for BTG. Here's Velda.
Well, that's a really good question. I can go back further than that, as it were, because when I was running a course on drama and education, which included contact with the Crucible Theatre and Education Company, that was way back in the 80s, probably. But at that point, there was a close contact with the theatre and education people, and also I was taking students into the Crucible studio for productions of my own, all of which was very enjoyable. But we lost the TIE company somewhere along the road, maybe when I was abroad or in London. So there's been a lot of that, and as I say, that there's now a much greater emphasis on musicals that are brought in, because they play to full houses. So that seems to me to be the most substantial change.
Things have changed drastically in that there isn't so much finance available from local authorities, so that's had a major impact, and a lot of theatres have had to take another look at some of the things that they're doing, more popular work, fewer members of the cast on the stage, and they're really having to be careful just how much money they spend. And really, I can't see there being much change in the future.
First of all, when I started viewing for British Theatre Guide, theatre websites were extremely rare. We were one of the first ones up there. And theatre PRs they varied completely. Some of them were incredibly welcoming, others didn't want to know, and there were many that were in between. Nowadays, I don't think there's any PR that stopped us from getting a ticket for any show, other than the very, very occasional one in some years. So that's asking for trouble in 2020. In terms of theatre itself, the nature of theatre seems to be changing. There's far more experimental work, far more work with technology. I can remember, I think it was 2001, seeing Hamlet at the Barbican and watching lights that sort of revolved and changed colours. And I, to my credit, and I'll claim some credit here, with Sam West playing Hamlet, I watched these things and thought, this is the future of theatre. And I was right occasionally. And then the computer-generated imagery, which Bill Dudley pioneered at the National, that was, again, a major change. And I think his budget for Coast of Utopia was $500,000. And that's the kind of thing now that kids will do on their laptops at home. And okay, you might pay a bit more for the projections to do something decent, but do it at zero cost. So it's changed a lot. In terms of acting, actors don't seem to be able to project anymore. They really need the microphones. And you go to a musical and it's just stupid. You're a musical in a tiny theatre and you've got microphones everywhere. But, it still goes on. It's still generally entertaining. I still have a lovely time.
I don't think I'm really qualified to say anything very profound about that. I think the things I've noticed in my area are probably only things that are a reflection of what is going on in the industry in itself. So the funding landscape has changed very dramatically, not just the reduction, but in some cases the total lack of funding. I think that reflects the political backdrop. The diminution in arts generally as part of the national curriculum, I think, is very likely starting to affect the creative sector. I think it's a short-sightedness that has started in the last decade but is going to go on into the future. I think, again, a local reflection is the industry concerns about representation, not just who is making theatre, that people from all walks of life will be able to enter the profession, but also the potential audiences. For instance, the growing number of venues and companies that will do relaxed performances or offer BSL interpretation. I think that's growing, and I see that seeping in. I think the problem is, again, going back to the old chestnut of funding, that a small venues struggle to provide the resources that will, for example, like BSL interpretation. So I think all of those things, I think there's a bit of the post-Me Too movement. And I would also say in some of the local theatre I've seen recently, something I have really enjoyed is the re-emergence of puppetry in adult theatre, for example. I think that was partially necessitated by funding cutbacks. I think shows like Warhorse gave puppetry, well, gravitas isn't probably quite the right word, but what it needed to gain acceptability. And I think that is a very positive, creative change. Mother is, the necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that I'm seeing more of that locally.
This is the ridiculous thing. There is more work being produced by small companies who are living from hand to mouth, doing profit share, goodness knows what else. But funded theatre and big productions of the sort of thing. I mean, a few years ago we had things like for instance, at Northern Stage, Erica Wyman, who's of course now with the RSC, did a fantastic production of A Doll's House. It wouldn't happen nowadays. For some reason, it seems as though budgets are squeezed and imagination is squeezed as well, frankly. There's still a lot of great stuff being produced. But for me, the most exciting development over the last few years, has been Alpha Betty, which is a 75-seater fringe theatre, doing really exciting work on next to nothing. No funding. They occasionally get a bit of programme funding, but there's no general funding. It's supported by the bar. Everything they take in the box office is passed on to the companies that are performing. And they're doing things like pay what you feel. You see the show, decide how much it was worth, and you pay that. And it's an exciting place to be. It's full of theatre people. It's full of enthusiastic youngsters and enthusiastic ageds as well. You know, I mean, I'm not exactly a youth, but myself and quite a few of my contemporaries really love Alpha Betty. It has that air of the Edinburgh Fringe, and they're doing exciting stuff. But when you look to the major production companies, you get the occasional really good piece. I mean, was it last year? Northern Stage did Sting's The Last Ship, which was great. But the excitement is coming from the small companies and the fringe venues, which is great, but it's also sad.
Well, since I started, it's changed quite a lot. We've still got the same main theatres, obviously, like the Royal Exchange, the Octagon in Bolton. We've lost the Library Theatre, that combined with Corner House to become Home. We've still got the Coliseum in Oldham. The fringe side, as I said before, we have a big fringe in Manchester, but that really has expanded a lot since I started reviewing. In 2003, I think it was, I started for British Theatre Guide. I think largely that was down to the late lamented 24/7 Theatre Festival, which I think was an amazing thing that we had for a while in Manchester. I don't think people from outside Manchester appreciate just how amazing that festival was. It was started by David Slack, and it stopped when it lost its Arts Council funding. But it's greatly missed, and it created opportunities for so many actors and writers and directors over a short while. And the legacy is just incredible. And I think that really injected a lot of life into the Manchester fringe scene. And a lot of Manchester fringe theatre is still original work. There are some plays that are produced, existing plays, but a large proportion of it is original work. And the other big introduction into Manchester is Hope Mill Theatre, which came only a few years ago, but it has been massive and is well known throughout the country. That is something that is certainly celebrated around the UK now, because it produces its own musicals. For such a small theatre, it produces things on a big scale and is now attracting some West End stars, like Tracy Bennett was in Mame only a few months ago. And a lot of their shows have transferred to London, gone on tour. their production of Hair has gone on a large-scale tour, not just small theatres, but it toured the number one touring houses around the country, including coming back to Manchester. And I think the two boys who run that are just amazing, the amount of work they put into that and the commitment. I think theirs is the big success story of the last few years in Manchester.
Yeah, as I say, there's been sort of simultaneously kind of opening up to larger scales of community work, but also the exciting thing I think for York is that we haven't really had a venue for fringe style shows to come for a night or 2 nights on a tour, and that's been something that I think we've missed a bit in York, and they've certainly done a lot at the Theatre Royal to kind of encourage touring shows into the studio there. But so before my time, there was kind of more of an art centre venue in York, which had shut down by the time I got there. I think community and amateur theatre has always been very strong in York, certainly. I'm speaking mostly about York because that's the area that I know the best, rather than sort of further afield in Yorkshire. But, so the amateur theatre scene has always been very strong, I think. But it's that sort of, just starting out company, companies maybe a couple of years out of university or new writing, new devised work, smaller scale works, hasn't really had a home. But there seems to be a bit more of that getting seen in York. And I think that's a positive for the kind of vibrancy of the theatre scene.
Things that have changed during my time, certainly there are always big changes in the content of the shows and how that's worked. But another change has been in titles. I mean, certainly when Tangled came out, we've seen a few more Rapunzels now. And I think one of the biggest influences has been Disney always on the industry. But in terms of that, really thinking about what have been the most Disney films that have been successful, Frozen, Tangled, Brave, Moana, all with strong female characters. The other thing that is not often talked about is that the fairy tale magic side of it, fairies aren't having as much prominence in the shows that I see, certainly, and focuses much more on that quest or that individual to do that. And I think that really does chime with our times that we are living in. We've been through recession, we're going through Brexit, you've got to get on with it yourself, there is no fairy magic one to do that, which is very different from the Victorian period that many people wanted to believe in fairies. We had all that fairyana. And I think another part of that are the Marvel films, those superhero films which are so successful, is all about sort of personal quest and righting wrongs and things. I mean, other things that have happened in theatres, certainly, one of the things that fascinates me is the website explosion that's happened since I've been writing for the British Theatre Guide. Really, back in 2009, theatre websites weren't very great. I mean, booking tickets, finding things was very difficult. Now, you can see how important Panto is because it often has a tab for itself, and the amount of content being created is great all throughout the year. And also a change in behaviours in the theatres. We saw this year a number of theatres coming out, as they have done for the last few years, saying we're not doing flashing wands, we're not doing all that, not only because it's annoying, but we know that financially it's a strain, but also plastic. Plastic is a big thing, and so we don't want to be having all these throwaway plastic toys or foam fingers which aren't recyclable, which don't do well for the environment.
For many of us, reviewing theatre has been a great experience in itself, but the benefits have gone beyond just a night at the theatre and the chance to express an opinion. I asked them what reviewing for British Theatre Guide has done for them. To start with, here's Sandra.
Well, I think the most important thing it's done is it's been a channel for me to do something creative. So I enjoy my daytime job, but it definitely was leaving a bit of my brain to atrophy. And so it's given me personal challenges, which I've enjoyed, particularly writing the occasional sort of extended feature rather than just reviewing. I think it's educating me. As I read press releases, I understand more about the wider context from not just a London-centric perspective. I think that's another thing it's given me. I have loved meeting people and interviewing people whose work I have admired sort of in awe, like Jack Shepherd and people like that. And I think one British Theatre Guide's great strength is that it is such a broad church. So as long as I don't come up with an idea that is completely stupid for something I want to write about, I get the green light and I get to do it. I hope that doesn't sound too self-indulgent, but, to write about something that you're passionate about is a freedom that I get, that I suspect a lot of reviewers get sent off, and you have to review this or you have to write about that. And we're not restricted in that way, and I think that has been brilliant for me.
Reviewing for the British Theatre Guide has opened up all sorts of avenues for me. It's enabled me to get a wider view of the theatrical world, particularly writing of new plays. It's introduced me to all sorts of interesting people, and I've seen some really excellent plays being produced. It's also helped me on a personal note in that I've written a play, and I didn't have much idea as to how to get it produced, but I contacted one of the companies who I reviewed at one stage, and this is a professional Derbyshire touring company, and they're hoping to mount a tour of my first play in 2020. So the British Theatre Guide has helped my career and my life enormously.
Well, quite a rich social life, in the sense that it's a pleasure to be able to invite people to come with me that I don't know very well, and this is an opportunity to get to know them better, that kind of thing. But more importantly, I found writing reviews quite challenging, I have to say. I do try very hard, but Michael Billington was my mentor, and he's just retired, of course. And what I admired was his ability to be critical but nice. I think I'm good at being critical but need to work on the nice.
It's enabled me to see plays that I wouldn't have got tickets for. It's enabled me to go to opening nights I wouldn't have been able to go to. More specifically, the reviewing, it's changed my perception of theatre and my enjoyment. And people say, wouldn't you enjoy it more not reviewing? No, I almost regardless, I'll review something even if I don't need to. I'm going to something in New York, probably buy a ticket for it, I'll still review it. It makes me think about it more, it makes me concentrate. If I'm seeing something really good, I analyse it more and enjoy it more and understand why I'm enjoying it more. If I see something bad, it gives me something to do. It means I mix with theatre critics a lot. I mix with other theatre people. I've met some wonderful people. I've met people who are really heroes of mine. Someone like Nick Hyton or Simon Russell Beale. I think they're both Sirs by now. I hope Simon Russell Beale is by now. And many others. It's just a wonderful experience, and the community of theatre critics. I'm lucky enough, like you, I'm a member of the Critics Circle, drama section, and it means I rub shoulders with the great and the good of the world of theatre. We're on first name terms. I can discuss theatre intelligently with people who know far more about it than I do, which amongst the general public there are some, but not so many.
Well, I get to see so much. I'm a pensioner, and so I don't exactly have a lot of money to spend. And it gets me to see so many things that are really worth seeing. From the commercial to the tiny, someone's back room almost. I'm seeing a show next week, which is going on in Newcastle's Literary and Philosophical Society's library. It's a one-man show. And that's going to be, I don't know whether it's going to be good, but it's going to be interesting. But I also get to see so many other things. I've met so many great people. I sometimes think, you're coming up to 77, don't you think you ought to retire? And then I think, no, I'm enjoying myself too much. So that's what I get out of it.
What I love about reviewing for British Theatre Guide is that I've got to see things that I just wouldn't have dreamed of seeing otherwise, and it's opened me up to a whole range of kinds of theatre that I wouldn't have thought of even seeing. There's always, so much that we don't have chance to cover or that I don't have time to see myself, of course, but there's such a variety of things available, and you just sort of go, okay, yeah, I'll take a punt on that. So I've seen, I'd never seen an opera before, reviewing it. I'd never seen, I maybe once in my youth had seen a pantomime, but since reviewing for the British Theatre Guide, I've seen the York Theatre Royal one pretty much, I think, every year for the last decade. And that was a real highlight for me, was sort of seeing going along to see Humpty Dumpty, it was, in 2009, and just being utterly baffled and, just what is everybody seeing in this, and having to go away and sort of figure out what to write about it as well. But over the years, kind of getting to know the in-jokes, getting to know the characters and the personalities, seeing when it was, oh yeah, that was a really vintage year, oh, a bit of an off year then. Seeing it at the National Railway Museum as well, I thought was a really, really fascinating kind of setting for a panto. And yeah, so I just would like to give a shout out to Beric Kaler and Damien Cruden and all the pantomime team who've kind of converted me in a very limited sort of, sphere anyway, to one particular pantomime.
A huge amount, really. Other reviewers have spoken about the community of reviewers in their area, been able to see lots of theatre that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. They wouldn't necessarily have chosen to see, but they've got a lot from. And the having to formulate an opinion, it's an amazing learning experience. You actually learn so much about theatre just by having to think about what to write about it under pressure as well, and time constraints. But I've got so much more from that as well, because a lot of the things that I do now came directly from being a reviewer from British Theatre Guide. From that, I was invited onto the panel of the Manchester Evening News Theatre Awards, and when that closed, I was invited as one of the founder members of the Manchester Theatre Awards. Sadly no more, but we ran that for a few years, and I directed their awards ceremonies a few times and was quite heavily involved with the whole setup. I was also invited to be a member of the Critics Circle because of it. I got involved with teaching at Rose Bruford College, one of the leading drama schools in the country. They do a distance learning, as it used to be called, it's now online, theatre studies degree course, which I graduated from many years ago. And I got back in touch with them and started teaching initially on their module for theatre criticism, but now I teach that and a few other modules as well. So there's so many things. And the community of theatre reviewers in Manchester is great and very supportive. It's big, obviously, because Manchester has such a big theatre scene, but it's also small in that we all know each other. Most of us know each other, and it's great to meet up. So, being a British Theatre Guide reviewer has opened up many doors for me, and it's been an amazing experience.
I mean, I honestly have a lot to thank the British Theatre Guide for. Back in 2009, I didn't know if it would be something that I would be doing every year, but very kindly, Peter, yourself, and Philip, all, were very, very embracing of my work. And that really allowed me to, because of Panto being across the country, chart that landscape, see lots of theatre, but also being sent to things in London that you would never have picked yourself, that you would have never even come across or might not have heard about, really forces you to widen your palette and also to respond critically. And not only has that really benefited my own research, and I publish widely now on pantomime, the ability to be in those venues and see that rather than trying to access that historical data some ways is really difficult. And of course, I'm looking at things different to maybe other reviewers that see other things. But absolutely, not only in that research has it been important, but in actually getting my job at the V&A. One of the things that we need to be in a national museum is subject specialists. And you can only be a specialist by honing your craft and by seeing as much theatre as you can. And obviously the privileged position of being a reviewer means that you get to see that, and then you are forced to think about it, to make it engaging and to respond to it in a critical way, thinking about the good things, the bad things, what worked, what didn't, and more importantly, why. It's not a bullet point list of do's and don'ts. You've got to support why that is. And actually thinking about that in the whole tradition of the theatre has been so vital and valuable, not only in knowing those venues and the types of things that they put on, but seeing people's careers rise. And also, with my other hat on, with my Panto Day hat on, having good relationships with all those venues to be able to make that now national celebration of the genre happen. And also, meeting people that have enabled and helped that, like yourself, David, who very kindly has assisted us all the way through and built the wonderful national database of pantomime performance. And so there's a real community there, a community of theatre lovers, of theatre goers, but also certainly career builders in that respect. And that's certainly contributed and still does to what I'm doing now, looking after the National Collection of Performing Arts at the V&A.
Of course, any anniversary would be incomplete without looking back at particular moments, so I asked our reviewers to delve into their memories for any highlights that stood out for them. Peter explained why he found this a problem.
I think I've got to say no, but I think that actually is an age thing rather than anything else. Because you ask me, people say to me when, particularly mid-season, what have you been to see recently? I've got to stop and think, I don't know. What have I seen? Yeah, I can't remember. And everything, everything seems to be. I just remember I had a good time. I enjoyed being in the theatre. This show, it was great, but so was that. I really can't put my finger on any one or two outstanding things that I remember. I just know that I've just loved every minute of it. Even, I tell you one thing that I do remember. This again was at Alphabetti. I was sitting with a director, an old friend of mine. We worked together back in the 60s and 70s. A guy called Mike Mould, whose brother actually is Roy Marsden, the actor. Anyway, we're sitting watching this show at Alphabetti, and I turned to, halfway through, I turned to Mike and said, Mike, is this as bad as I think it is? And he says, no, it's worse. But even, things like that, you learn from. You watch something like that, you think, that is diabolical. Why? And then you start to analyse why.
Well, I've touched on the sort of that sense of bafflement and then growing kind of joy at the pantomime. I'd say that doing the podcast interviews, having the opportunity to put those together has been really just exciting, really sort of invigorating. It's given me the opportunity. It's really often kind of deepened my love and respect for companies' work or individuals' work. Just the range of people that I've been able to meet and chat to whose work I've either known very well already or hadn't known and then have been to see their shows. So people like, just instantly leaping to mind was talking to Rashdash, who's a company who I've got to know. They're originally anyway a Yorkshire-based company, and I got to chat to Abby and Helen from Rashdash, and they were just so clear and so focused on their works. There was so much care and intelligence behind what they were saying that it just really kind of took my admiration for their work to a new level. And people like Gilly Roach, who at the time was working as a new work producer at West Yorkshire Playhouse, or now Leeds Playhouse. Katie Posner and Juliet Forster, I love chatting to them about their community theatre work. James Brining, as I've said, I've really sort of admired what he's done. So just the chance to talk to these people behind the productions, and also on the production side. So those people like the artistic directorship and the producers and the people making those decisions behind the scenes that you don't always get to see on stage. That's been a real highlight for me of working for British Theatre Guide, yeah.
There are so many wonderful memories that I have. One of the ones that people always ask me about, they always ask, you see so many pantos, have there ever been any things that go wrong or things that have been, really hilarious because they've been awful? People in panto do things that look like they're going wrong, but don't all the time. But it's wonderful to be in an audience when the audience is really engaged with the show. And I remember Broadway barking Snow White, and this is probably 2-3 years into reviewing. The Wicked Queen was really riling the audience, and she went, "You make me sick." And through this cavernous booze, this little 7-year-old child from behind me shouted at the top of its voice, "You make me sick in a bucket." And it was just so hilarious that it seemed perfectly timed. There was a pause between it, and I've never ever forgotten that. I've also never forgotten Nottingham Playhouse's Cinderella, where it all began. The transformation seemed very dark with coal. And I thought, this is weird. Where's this going? And, Kenneth Allen Taylor, the master of pantomime that he is, was playing on the fact that coal and diamonds both have a carbon base. And slowly, as this transformation scene evolved and evolved, the coal, turned into diamonds. And there were lots of illusions about that happening there. Now, it wasn't a really sciencey transformation sequence, but that sort of narrative integrity of how that magic might happen was wonderful. I also remember being at Trafalgar Studios for Dream of the Dog, which is a play set in South Africa about apartheid. And one of the characters leaves and then comes back and confronts another character that he knew. And that's the first time in the theatre that I've actually had a sort of physical reaction where my heart has been beating, seriously worried that one of the characters is going to get injured. You know, the amount of investment in that space, not only because the Trafalgar Studio, the one that I was in, was the smaller one, but the acting intensity was so great as a result of that. And another show that I always remember, which I've never seen again, and I've never even seen it advertised or staged, which I think is a great shame, is A Trip to Bountiful, which was at the Courtyard Theatre. Great American piece of writing. And there's a character in it who's a really horrible character, and she just goes on about needing her Coca-Cola all the time. But it's funny, those ones really do stay with you, as well as the first Panto that I reviewed, which was Mother Goose at the Greenwich Theatre. And it was funny because I hadn't seen Mother Goose for years and years. You know, having seen that work that Andrew Pollard and the team do there year on year, they are definitely one of the best in the business. And it was a treat to kick off my Panto reviewing with that, because there have been years where you have 3 or 4 on the trot and you think, oh my gosh, this is the 4th Dick Whittington I've seen in a row. How on earth do I write anything about this? But as people always challenge me, you know, is there anything else to write about pantomime? I always say, is there anything else to write about Shakespeare?
I remember, well, obviously, like I said, interviewing Jack Shepherd was brilliant. I remember my very first interview with Philip Cross, and he was fantastic, and he just kept on chatting to me for ages and ages. It was a really good experience doing that. I remember interviewing someone whose name I won't mention, but I was extremely nervous, and I put my phone down on record on a coffee table, and we were chatting away, and it was like drawing blood out of a stone. And I was asking some pre-prepared questions, and it was not going particularly smoothly. And then someone came in and brought us a cup of tea. So I answered a question, and I finally was getting an interesting answer as opposed to a monosyllabic put down. And this person started stirring their cup of tea, and I completely lost the recording. And when I was listening back to it, all I could hear was the clanking of a teaspoon against the side of the cup. And it was absolute agony to then try and write something that was remotely interesting from this very, very difficult interview. So I wouldn't call that one of my highlights, but it's definitely one of my memories.
And well, I mentioned I interviewed both Nick Hytner and Simon Russell Beals, so those were real highlights. I've interviewed people in New York on Broadway. That's been really special. In terms of plays that I've seen, I was thinking about this beforehand, so I thought you might ask that question. And I think both from the National as it happens, One Man, Two Governors, I think the funniest play I've ever seen, though Noises Off is competing, and The History Boys. And I think probably, you know, they were the two outstanding plays in the time I've been reviewing for British Theatre Guide. Lots of Shakespeare productions have been wonderful. And I feel a bit bad because I've identified plays by men, largely featuring men, and that's just maybe the way it was. And I'm probably being unfair to some wonderful female writers, directors, etc., who are really coming to the fore now.
I'm with Peter on this one, in that I have a terrible memory, and so when somebody asks me what I've seen recently that's really good, I really have to think about what I've seen recently at all very, very often. So thinking back over how many years is it I've been reviewing? 16, 17 years is quite difficult. There are some amazing productions I've seen. Obviously, I've seen some that I've not liked quite so much. But I think there are some highlights that aren't necessarily productions. Like I mentioned the 24/7 Theatre Festival. For a while, they had a Sunday opening before the public opening where they invited critics to the first performance, which was like a public dress rehearsal. And it was a great little community event where we all got together. We were there with the writers and the actors, and we saw the shows. And not necessarily all of them, because when I first started reviewing, there were 20-odd shows on. But that was a great event. Also, some of the people I've met, some of the reviewers as well, some of the experiences that I had with the Manchester Theatre Awards. Also, Edinburgh. I had some great experiences in Edinburgh, and I actually had a chance to meet some of the people whose work I've admired. You know, people People like Howard Reed, who is now writing for Horrible Histories on TV and many other things, but we saw him when he was doing his show with Little Howard, his animated comedian sidekick. Puppet State Theatre, they're amazing. Man Who Planted Trees, I've seen many times now on stage and on DVD, and I've got to meet all the people involved in that. And some of the people that I've interviewed some people who are really at the top of the profession, some real heroes of mine, like Mike Shepherd of Knee High, who is an amazing guy who's still producing amazing work now. I remember interviewing the great director Michael Bogdanov in a very windy tent at the Edinburgh Book Festival. He was very amused by me trying to use various umbrellas to keep the wind out the microphone. That was an amazing experience. Sadly, he's no longer with us. So many interviews, so many great people, from Fringe right up to West End, people who are now famous and were famous then. So many highlights in the productions themselves, but it's just so many great experiences around the whole experience of being part of British Theatre Guide.
Some of the highlights that I've had while reviewing for the British Theatre Guide. A few years ago, I saw one of Derbyshire's own actors, Robert Lindsay. He was performing at the old Derby Playhouse in a play called Onassis. He was absolutely fantastic in that. And I also saw Robert Powell, who many people remember as Jesus of Nazareth. And that was such a fantastic TV series, which was seen by an inordinate amount of people. And I saw him in a play over at Birmingham Rep, managed to interview him over there as well. And reviewing for the BTG has just enabled me to meet so many people, so many interesting people, and see such fantastic work. And I'm thankful virtually every day that there's so much going on in this region, and there's so much that you can enjoy.
Some things that stand out. The Last King of Scotland, I think I mentioned in my list, and I love anything by Matthew Bourne. I've only recently got enthusiastic about ballet, modern ballet this is, and I find his works extraordinarily imaginative. There was a very good Wizard of Oz a couple of years ago, an early one from Robert Hastie, terrific use of the stage, very inventive. Some while ago we had the James plays. I think that probably had come up from London, and there was a good Inspector Calls. But I mean, otherwise, my real love is Shakespeare, so I'm always glad to see Shakespeare. And what I miss, I have to say, are and the kind of thing that's more likely to be in Manchester at the Royal Exchange is other plays from the canon. So I'm talking about contemporaries of Shakespeare, or leaping into Europe for Chekhov or Ibsen or Brecht. That's, I think, where Sheffield Theatre is a bit thin on the ground.
Finally, I asked each of them for some ideas of where they think theatre and theatre reviewing is going, either in their area or in theatre as a whole. Here's Simon.
So I think over the next 10 years, we are going to see a lot of debates and discussions about gender, sexuality, certainly in pantomime, a lot of reassessment about what is appropriate and what is not. We're already seeing the last 5 years, a lot of discussions about the dame character. Is she offensive because she's misogynistic? Is she offensive to the trans community? Is she not offensive at all because she's a character like everyone else? What is that within the pantomime structure, and how does that work? So I think those debates are going to continue. I think we're also going to see debates not only in pantomime but across theatre much more intensify about gender balanced casts. And I really hope that the industry takes that up. I would love to see more comedic roles for women in Panto. Certainly something this year I've been speaking very passionately about. Why aren't we seeing more female dames, more female comics? And I think also there's going to be much more scrutiny of what happens on the stage. But as we know, things are only going to get more expensive. Things are only going to get more difficult to stage. So it will be interesting to see where the new voices come from. I mean, Beric Kaler retired from York last year. He's still written the one that's currently on there, Sleeping Beauty. Kenneth Allen Taylor is still going at Nottingham, but, we're not probably in a decade he won't be there. So the next generation of pantomime people like Susie McKenna, like Andrew Pollard, will then be at the top of that hierarchy. But who are those voices coming up from below? Prime Panto's launched this year. At Cheltenham, they're doing great work, and they've just got Blackpool Winter Gardens next year. Who are the new voices? And I think it's something we always ask in the theatre. Who are the new voices? Who are the new talent? But as we know, Panto isn't taught really at universities. It comes around once a year. How do you hone a craft? So I'll certainly be excited to see where those new voices and talents and performers are coming from.
Theatre reviewing in this area, from the more traditional point of view, it is struggling because the local newspapers around here, they're all joining together these days, and there's so few opportunities for people actually to review for traditional newspapers. But there seem to be a lot more online sites appearing, and there are certain qualities that some of these sites have. They go across a wide spectrum, but I can foresee that they can only become more of them in the future, and reviewing online really is the way forward. Theatre itself in the Midlands, I can see that continuing. There are so many different sizes of theatre that it's going to continue. And for instance, if I didn't have a day job, I could be at a different production every night of the week. And I can't see that there will be fewer theatres to go around. In fact, there are various organisations which are aiming in the Midlands particularly to get about more and to get productions into community halls and various places which don't normally have theatre. So I can only see that it's going to continue over the next decade.
Well, I had a useful chat with a guy that was here earlier today mending a window that got broken by a bird. I mean, he was sort of a very pleasant, sort of intelligent working man who didn't go to the theatre much. So I was asking him why he didn't go, and he was saying he thought it needed to be better advertised. There needed to be more billboards. There needed to be more family tickets, all that kind of thing. But I think the money is a problem. The theatre is packed out with family groups for the Panto, for example, but I'm not aware that they come back very much during the year. And what's more surprising is that we've got 2 universities in Sheffield, but the student audience is very thin as well. I think I mainly see them in the studio. Maybe it's the kind of play that they want to see, but I think there could be more student interest really from to universities in the city. So from my point of view, I would hope that there was going to be a wider range of material put on, but I can understand, particularly I think the theatre was not doing very well financially in the mid-80s or 90s, I don't know. They've obviously had to look hard at the nature of the audience and to see who's coming in. And as I can say, it's the musicals mainly that are very well attended, and probably often by people who are involved in amateur musicals themselves.
I think the answer is probably just more of the same, as long as you're willing to welcome me. Theatre is changing to an extent, but there's still wonderful shows. It's noticeable actually in the West End. There are virtually no new plays. All you're actually going to get are new musicals from the States or revivals. You get the occasional transfer of something that might have been on at the National or the Old Vic. So the idea that you get brave new writing in the West End now, you might get 2 or 3 plays, if James Graham is writing something, the team that wrote Mischief Theatre, the team that wrote The Play That Goes Wrong, they put something on, but that's about it now. And the Fringe is getting really healthy, and maybe that's where things are going. There are some bigger theatres opening on the Fringe now, which may begin to sort of get some of the big plays in.
I don't know. Somebody was just pointing out, I was just chatting on the phone to one of our reviewers who's based in the south of the region, Teesside and Teesdale, Helen Brown, and we were talking about this, and she said she'd noticed how many bloggers there are. There are very, very few. Well, I don't think, to be perfectly honest, that there are any specialist print journal reviewers. All of the local press, the regional press, let go their entertainments or arts editors. And it seems to be bloggers. And, some of them are very odd family day out bloggers, who tend to review things like, obviously children's shows, but pantos and whatnot. It's all blogs. There are times, I hope this doesn't sound as if I'm being arrogant, but sometimes I think, hang on, am I the only one who is actually a theatre person? I don't know. It's rather weird. But I just beaver away doing what I enjoy doing, trying to be as accurate and as supportive, obviously, as I can be, without, but as honest and objective as I can be, because I love theatre, and I love theatre people, so obviously I want to encourage, but I also want the theatre in the region to be as good as it possibly can be.
Well, theatre in Manchester seems to be in a very healthy state, largely. As I said before, some of the theatres have not had as big a programme recently, but I can see that Home seems to be staying in the same direction of being mainly a small to mid-scale receiving house. They seem to be quite happy doing that. I don't know if they're going to eventually get an artistic director and produce their own work more. They've done a few co-productions. We're still getting, ATG still bringing some really big productions into the Palace and the Opera House, and they're still showing some of their big shows first in Manchester before the West End. So that's great for us. Hope Mill is going from strength to strength, and I expect it to carry on just as it is. They met all of their original targets within a year of being open, and they're just carrying on like that. The Fringe just keeps going. There are good years and bad years on the Fringe. There's so many productions there. We've got the new 53-2 theatre that's going to be opening somewhere under what we all still call the GMX, but I think it's now Manchester Central or something. Theatre reviewing, it has, as some of my colleagues have said, it's going more towards online, towards the blogs. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of them are more general blogs, some of them are not necessarily run by theatre specialists, but some of them are. Some of them are run by very knowledgeable people. Some of them are theatre people themselves, or they have been theatre reviewers, but as the local press have been shedding their arts coverage, the same in our area as everywhere else. Maybe they've gone independent and just do their own thing, even if it's not something that's a paid job. It's a difficult thing to retire from, really, once you start reviewing. Yeah, Manchester is just a vibrant city. It has been for a long time. It seems to have got more so since I've been reviewing, and the local council is very supportive of the arts and culture in general. So I can see Manchester being in a very healthy state. Going beyond there in the northwest, Liverpool also has a great theatre scene, and we have reviewers who cover Blackpool and Lancaster and up into Cumbria as well. Theatre by the Lake is still going. That's also got a new artistic director recently. So yeah, I can only see good things for the future.
Clearly there's more and more venues for people to review and to critique and to offer perspectives on theatre work, and more people doing that through blogs and sort of magazines and things online, and even just on Twitter. So I think there's hopefully and I see that as a hopeful thing. So that hopefully I hope there is a proliferation of voices who are able to comment on and reflect on and opine about theatre. And I think that, this is not specific to my region, to Yorkshire, but there are, a number of York-based or Yorkshire-based online outlets now where people can review and can publish thoughts and comments. And so in terms of the criticism, clearly there's a move to online, and that's got some positives and some negatives, I guess. In terms of the theatre work itself, as I say, I think there's more opportunity in York, in the immediate region, for smaller scale work to get toured around. I'm really excited about putting shows on in upstairs rooms in pubs, or just putting it on wherever. I think that in the funding climate we've got, I think you have to be able to kind of adapt to whatever spaces and audiences are out there. It's a moment of transition for the York Theatre Royal specifically, as I mentioned earlier, and that to me feels like the next choice of artistic director is going to be a really significant one, because it's the first time they've had to make that choice in a quarter of a century, nearly. that's going to really shape the future of theatre, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to see what comes next. I'm slightly trepidatious about what funding is available and will continue to be available for places, and companies locally. But as always, kind of end the year and look back over what I've seen and go, what a breadth of brilliant people are out there making what incredible ranges and forms of work. And I'm just count myself as lucky that I've got to see a tiny fragment of it.
I don't think there is enough reviewing of theatre in my area, actually. I think South East London has far too long been seen as a kind of transport black spot, and people think that it's too difficult to get to. It's not true, and I think I would personally love to see more reviewing of shows that take place in South East London. If there were more nights in a week, I would be doing it. But I think South East London theatre it's like newly born Bambi. It's on some shaky legs with a sort of slightly more established mother figure behind it. But yeah, we need more support down here to South East London theatre. Come, everybody. It's great.
That's it for our 200th episode. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to Philip Fisher, Peter Lathan, Sandra Giorgetti, Steve Orme, Mark Smith, Velda Harris and Simon Sladen for their contributions, and to all of our reviewers for what they do for us throughout the year. My name is David Chadderton. We'll be back to our normal interview format for our 201st episode, but meanwhile, please do subscribe to our podcast feed if you don't already on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast network, and maybe even leave us a nice review. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.